Shabbat Shalom. Happy Sabbath. This morning we would like to look at the subject, the dry bones of Alkebulans. The dry bones of Alkebulan's Hebrews. Before the Europeans colonized Africa, the continent was then called Alkebulan. It was a term used by the Moors, the Nubians, the Numidians, the Cartesians, and the Ethiopians. So it was well known that the Alkebulans are the Africans, and this morning we want to frame that within the context of the Hebrew. So first I would like to read for you from the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 13, and we're going to start at the 20th verse. But all the Israelites went down to the Philistine to sharpen every man his share, and his coulter, and his axe, and his mattock. Yet they had a file for the mattocks, and for the coulter, and for the forks, and for the axes, and to sharpen the goads. So it came to pass in the day of the battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan, but with Saul and with Jonathan, his own son, there found. Also, let's look at Isaiah chapter 7 and the verse 25. And on all the hills that shall be digged with the mattock, there shall not come thither the fear of briars and thorn, but it shall be for the sending forth of the oxen and the treading of lesser cattle. Another text I want you to read, and it will give you an indication of where we're going this morning, 2 Chronicles 34 and verse 6, and it reads, and so did he in the cities of Manasseh and Ephraim and Simeon, even unto Naphtali, with their mattocks round about. So reading these texts this morning gives the impression that our study this morning takes us into the areas of anthropology, genetics, geography, and archaeology. So it is a digging expedition. It is a digging expedition this morning to ascertain for ourselves our own history, and how our history is indeed framed in the context of the scriptures. And I'm going to be reading also from the book of Jasher, the book of Jasher or Yesha. Now, it is interesting that they have taken this book out of the canon of scriptures, and they tell you not to read it because some have alleged that it's not inspired, whereas the Bible is telling you to read it. The men are telling you not to read it, but the word of Yah is telling you to read it. And I just want to read from 2 Samuel chapter 1 and starting at verse 17. He said, and David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son, and he bade them to teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Yesha. So he's saying, having read this passage here in 2 Samuel, you can also go and read the corresponding literature in the book of Yesha. That's what he's telling you. And so We also read in Joshua chapter 10 and verse 13, you remember that incident when Joshua commanded the moon and the sun to stand still, and thereafter it is said, go now and read it in the book of Yehezqel. So we want to show you that when we speak of Yah's word, we're talking about everything that Yah speaks is his word. And whether or not they put it in the canon and call it the Bible or not, it is still Yah's word. So we want to look this morning at the dry bones of Alkebulan. And what does it really mean? What are we saying? In our study this morning, we will cover a period of time primarily that looks at Egypt from the 12th to the 19th dynasty inclusive. That means we're looking at from the time the promise was made to Abraham in chapter 12 of Genesis, that his descendants would spend time in a land that is not theirs, the land of Am, David calls it, the land of the blacks, the land of the Alkebulans. You know, often we speak of Egypt as if it's not in Alkebulan or Africa. It's there, and we could go as far as to say there is no such thing as the Middle East. And perhaps Israel is indeed historically may have well been seated in the land of North Africa. But we will leave that for the time being, and we want to look at the situation here that confronts us this morning. And so, as I indicated, it is a digging expedition, and we want to dig to our roots. And to preface all of this, I want to say this, that we are told that Moses, traditionally that is, spent 40 years in Egypt, and then after he left Egypt, he went to Midian, spent another 40 years, and then 40 years into the wilderness. And that's the sum total of the time we give to him and the places that he has been. And we want to show you this morning that's not the case. That's not the case. And I'm going to be reading now from the book of that said Yehezqel or Jesha, and I'm reading here from the 70th portion of the book of Jesha, and I'm starting at verse 44. And the word said, and Moses said unto Pharaoh, let there be given unto the servants of the children of Israel who are in Goshen one day to rest therein from their labor. And the king, this is Pharaoh, answered Moses and said, behold, I have lifted up thy face in this thing to grant the request. And Pharaoh ordered a proclamation to be issued throughout Egypt and Goshen, saying, to you all the children of Israel, thus saith the king, for 6 days you shall do your work and labor, but on the seventh day you shall rest and shall not perform any work. Thus shall you do all the days as the king and Moses, his son, Bethiah, have commanded. Now, the first thing you notice here is that Pharaoh allowed the children of Israel in Goshen to keep the Sabbath. They kept the Sabbath. And moreover, we see here that this was before Mount Sinai. The commandments were not yet given on Mount Sinai, and the Sabbath predates that. The keeping of the Sabbath predates that. So when I hear people say that the Sabbath is for the Jews, I ask them, well, was Adam a Jew? Was Abraham a Jew? No. We see that before they were given, it was kept. Now, come with me also to the chapter 71 of the book of Yehezqel, and it reads, And when Moshe was 18 years old, he desired to see his father and mother, and he went to them to Goshen. And when Moses had come near Goshen, he came to a place where the children of Israel were engaged in work, and he observed their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian smiting one of the Hebrews' children. Note here, Moses was 18 years old when this incident took place. He was 18 years old. And when the man who was beating saw Moses, he ran to him for help. For the man Moshe was greatly respected in the house of Pharaoh, and he said to him, "My master, attend to me. This Egyptian came to my house in the night, bound me, and came to my wife in my presence, and now he seeks to take my life away." Understand the incident. Jesha is telling us this man was bounded in his own house, and the man who came in took his wife. That is the context of what we read in the scriptures about why Moses killed this man. And when Moses heard this wicked thing, his anger was kindled against the Egyptian, and he turned this way and the other. And when he saw there was no man, he smote the Egyptian and hid him in the sand, and delivered the Hebrew from the hand of him that smote him. And the Hebrew went to his house, and Moses returned to his home and went forth and came back to the king's house. And when the man had returned home, he thought of repudiating his wife, for it was not right in the house of Jacob for any man to come to his wife after she had been defiled. The man said, "I can't go to my wife because my wife has been defiled by another man." He can't do that. And so it says here in verse 6 that the woman, his wife, went and told her brothers, and the woman's brothers sought to slay him, and he fled to the house and escaped. And on the second day, Moses went forth to his brethren and saw, and behold, two men quarreling. This is the next day. And he said to the wicked one, "Why dost thou smite thy neighbor?" And he answered him and said to him, "Who has set thee over you as prince and judge over us?" Who gave you authority over us? Are you going to kill me the same as you killed the Egyptian? And when Moses heard that and knew that this would have gotten to Pharaoh's hearing, the word says Moses fled. Where did Moses go? Where did he go? Verse 9 says, and Aaron heard of this affair, and Pharaoh heard of this affair, and he ordered Moses to be slain. So Yah sent his angel, and he appeared unto Pharaoh in the likeness of captain of the guard. And the angel of Yah took the sword from the hand of the captain of the guard, and took his head off with it, for the likeness of the captain of the guard was turned into the likeness of Moses. So Moses slew the man, and Pharaoh heard. So a warrant is now out for Moses' arrest and death. At which time Aaron, his brother, alone remained in Egypt. Where did Moses go? The word says that Moses went to the land of Cush. That's what the word says. In chapter 72, And verse 22, the word says, and Moses was 18 years old when he fled from Egypt, not 40, as they've taught us. He was 18 years old when he fled from Egypt, from the presence of Pharaoh, and he fled and escaped to the camp of Hyrcanus, which at that time was besieging Cush. And Moses was 9 years with the camp of Hyrcanus, king of Cush. 9 years. So all that time that they were besieging Cush, and Moses went out and came in with them. So Moses lived with the Cushites. Hear me? Moses lived with the Alkebulans, the people from Africa. They don't tell us that. But Jasher wants you to know that. It is telling us that this happened. Verse 24, and the king and princes of the fighting men loved Moses, for he was great and worthy. His stature was like of a noble lion. His face was like the sun, and his strength was that of a lion, and he was counselor to the king. And at the end of the 9 years, Hyrcanus was seized with mortal disease, and his illness prevailed over him, and he died on the 7th day. And the word says, Moses later became the king of Cush when he was 27 years old. So he ran away from Egypt at the age of 18, spent 9 years with Cush before becoming king when he was 27 years old. That's the history. So join me now in the 72nd portion of the book of Jasher. It says, and in the 55th year of the reign of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, that is in the 157th year of the Israelite going down into Egypt, Moses was reigning with Cush. Moses was 27 years old when he began to reign over Cush, and 40 years did he reign. Moses reigned over the Cushites, the Alkebulans, for 40 years. They don't tell us that. And that's our history. And the word wants us to know that Moses was king over the Cushite even before he started to lead the children of Israel. We've got to understand that. And so we wanted to set that picture so that you get the context of what I'm about to say now. Because often we read Genesis and we read Exodus, and as we get to the last few chapters of Genesis, of Bereshit, to make the transition into the book of Exodus, we encounter two significant men here. The first of which I spoke earlier is Moses. And then we meet a man called Joseph, or Joseph, who is, of course, before Moses, but I spoke earlier of Moses. And I want to first say that the children of Israel, they spent 210 years in Egypt. Not 430 years. The 430 years covers the whole span of time from the promise was made from Abraham all the way to the Exodus. That's 430 years. But the actual physical staying in Egypt was 210 years. We've got to understand that. But perhaps you're wondering, why did I say Alkebulan Hebrews? Why? Why did I say that? Why did I say that? All right, come with me to the book of Bereshit, chapter 48, and I'm reading from the Septuagint. The Septuagint. Now, most Bibles, the King James edition, is taken from the Masoretic text. Now, the Septuagint predates the Masoretic text by about 1,200 years, and it was commissioned in Egypt, North Africa. I have a liking for the Septuagint. So join me now in the 48th portion. And the word says, after this, when it was told Joseph that thy father is sick, he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and went to Jacob. And when they told Jacob, saying, behold, your son Joseph is coming to thee, Yehezqel strengthened himself and sat upon the bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, my Yah appeared to me in Luzah, in the land of Canaan, and blessed me, and said, behold, I will make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, and make thee a multitude of nations, and I will give thee the land, even to thy seed after thee, for a personal possession. We've got to understand, we know the story that Joseph was sold by his brothers to the Ishmaelites. We know that. And he spent, at the time he was 17 years old, and that period of time between him being sold and him being in prison, I think 13 years had elapsed. So at the age of 30, he was given parole and taken out because he had interpreted a couple of dreams, and they were as he indicated the outcome would be. But by that time, he had been given the daughter, Asenath, the Egyptian, the priest of On. Now, we read that the priest of On, they were in that time the most intelligent people in Egypt, in Alkebulan. So it seemed here that she was given to him by virtue of his elevated position in life, because it was an aristocratic woman that was given to him. And as we know, she gave unto him two sons, of which we're reading here. Now, Jacob, who was given the name Israel, when he wrestled with that angel, is now about to bless these African boys. Now, let's read on. Verse 5, now therefore, thy two sons who have been born to thee in the land of Egypt, before I came to thee into Egypt, are mine. Jacob said, who is Israel, these two boys are mine. You may have given birth to them, Joseph, but they're mine. That's a profound statement. It's quite significant because it has prophetic undertones and overtones. Understand where I'm going with this. Ephraim and Manasseh, like Reuben and Simeon. Now understand why he's speaking this way. Reuben is the firstborn, and he's about to take the birthright, the scepter, everything, and allocate them to different people. The birthright belongs to the firstborn. He's now taking it from Reuben because, Reuben climbed up onto his father's bed and committed some strange sin. So he gives the birthright to Joseph. And he gives a scepter to Judah. Not to Simeon or to Reuben. Simeon is the second born. Because Simeon, as you know, was angry because of what happened to their sister who was raped. And with Levi, they went and massacred the Shechemites. We know that story. So he said, I can't use these boys. I'm going to give the blessings to others. And he did. Let's read on. Ephraim and Manasseh, like Reuben and Simeon, shall be mine. And the issue which thou mayest have after thee shall go by the name of their brothers. They shall be enrolled in their inheritances. Now, when I came out of Assyria and Mesopotamia, Rachel, thy mother, died in the land of Canaan, just as I drew near the race ground of Shabbatah on the way to Ephratah. So I buried her in the way of the race ground. The same is Bethlehem. Then Israel, seeing the sons of Joseph, said, who are these with you? Who are they? And Joseph said, these are my sons, obviously. And so he said, when he brought them near to him, he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, lo, I was deprived of your presence, yet behold, Yah has shown me even thy seed, even your children. Now, I thought you were dead at some point because that's what your brothers had told me. But now I know that you are not dead, and I've lived to see not only you return, but my grandchildren. And so what we're about to see here will have riveting effect down the ages to generation yet unborn. And so we need to ingest the word here. Because in verse 14 it says, but Israel stretching out his right hand laid it upon Ephraim's head. Now he was the youngest. Now the birthright, as we know, goes to the firstborn. Ephraim is a secondborn. And so Joseph is not pleased, which is quite interesting because Joseph himself had received the blessing that should have been Reuben. But this sagely Jacob, this sagely old man, recognized his own history that he got the blessing over Esau. And so we're dealing with the secondborn in all these cases. And verse 15 says, and he blessed them and said, the Yah whom my fathers Abraham and Ishtar worshipped, the Yah who had led me from my youth to this day, the angel who delivered me from all evil, bless these children and let them be called by my name and by the name of my fathers Abraham and Ishtar, and may they be increased to a great multitude of the earth. So he's giving this prelude before the blessing. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand on his head. But he refused and said, I know, my son. Watch what he's doing, because he's crossing his hand to reflect that all blessing will not necessarily come through Jacob, but will come at the cross at Calvary. That's why he's crossing his hand to give that signal. So here, verse 90, but he refused and said, I know, my son, I know this indeed will be a people and will be exalted, but his younger brother will be greater than he, and his seed will be a multitude of nations. Did you get that? He says Israel will be a multitude of nations, not just one nation. Everybody who accept Yeshua and are obedient to him, the same is an Israelite. He who is an Israelite on an outward way is not an Israelite. Galatians 3:29 makes that glaringly obvious. He said, if you be in Yeshua, only then are you Abraham's seed. So we have a problem in that there are many today who claim to be children of Abraham, but they reject the Messiah. They reject the Messiah. And so we have this situation that evangelicals don't deal with very well, because they have this idea that we must support Israel, and rightly so. But first you must determine who Israel is. And Israel, the Israel of Yah, according to Galatians 6 and verse 16, is those who accept Yeshua and are obedient to him. So he refused to do what Joseph had asked him to do. But he said, but his younger brother will be greater than he, and his seed, he will be a great, Manasseh will be great, but Ephraim will be greater than he. And his seed will be a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day and said, by you, Israel will bless, saying. So he placed his name on these two boys, and so these two boys were called Israel. Don't miss that. The other brothers got their blessing in chapter 49. They did not get this blessing. This is for Ephraim and Manasseh. Who is Israel? Ephraim and Manasseh. We've got to understand that. So when we talk about an Israelite, we're talking about every person who comes to Yeshua, accept him, and by faith live to please him. Such is an Israelite. To be born in Israel, in the land, is not sufficient. And Yeshua had that conversation with some people back in his day in chapter 8 of John, when they insinuated that he didn't know who his father was. And they then said, Abraham is our father. And he made it quite clear that if they were Abraham's children, they would do the works of Abraham. In fact, he went on to say that you are like your father, the devil. He said that. And later on in Revelation chapter 2 and 3 makes it clear that they are the synagogue of Satan. He said that. And so we understand now that these Alkebulans, these African boys, they got the blessing of the birthright of Israel. It's there in the word. It's there in the word. They got the birthright. And therefore, you understand in 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 9, why Elisha was begging Elijah for a double portion. He was asking for the blessing of the firstborn. That's what he was asking for. And Elijah said, if you see me go up, then yes, but if you don't see me, you don't get it. And he watched him. What? You got to keep a watchful eye. You got to keep your eye on the land. That's the principle coming out of this. So now that we've established, and I want to reemphasize this so we get it, that when you hear we talk about Israel, we're not talking about the common notion of Israel. We're talking about the biblical definition of Israel. That we have two Alkebulans, two boys born in Africa, and we know this was in the 18th dynasty of Israel, of Egypt, when the people there were mostly bronzish black people. We know that. Let's not shy away from the facts. We're not dealing with color here in one sense, in that the whole idea of salvation is about righteousness. We've got to get that. But we cannot ignore the fact of what the scripture is saying. This was in the 18th, as I indicated earlier, the 18th dynasty, and we're covering a span of time from the 12th dynasty to the 19th dynasty of Egypt. At this time, the people were black. And so you can well conclude that Moses was like them, bronzish color, that he lived in Pharaoh's house. Yeshua himself, the word said, he has bronze feet, burnished bronze feet. These are facts, and we ought not to play over them as they don't exist. It's in the word. But now what I want to do is to look at the Exodus, or the pre-Exodus, I should say, the pre-Exodus. So come with me to Joshua chapter 75, because what we need to know is that 30 years before the real Exodus, a group of these Alkebulans, Africans, Ephraim's descendant, left Egypt. They had calculated the time that was given to Abraham in chapter 12 and chapter 15, and they at this time felt it was now time to leave Egypt, but they were leaving before the time that Yah had given them, and they took on the Philistine, and the Philistine killed them. So we're going to read the story so we understand what we're saying when we talk to people, and we're using the word to validate the statements we're making. We are not conjecturing at all. Come with me to chapter 75 of the book of Joshua. At that time, in the 180th year, so this is the 180th year, so that's 30 years before the 210 years before the actual Exodus. So we need to understand it. It says, in that year, the Israelites going down to Egypt, there went forth from Egypt valiant men, 30,000 on foot from the children of Israel, who were all of the tribe of Joseph. Did you get me? These are Joseph's descendants. They're Ephraim, they're Alkebulan, they're North Africans, descendants. They left Egypt before Moses. For they said the period was completed which Yah had appointed the children of Israel in the times of old, which he had spoken to Abraham. They're referencing here Genesis chapter 12. And these men girded themselves, and they put each man his sword at his side, and every man his armor upon him. And they trusted to their strength, and they went out together from Egypt with a mighty hand. They trusted in their what? Their strength. Listen to what the word says. But they brought no provisions for the road, only silver and gold. Sounds like today, isn't it? Not even bread for that day did they bring in their hand. Now, this is pride, and insolent. They thought we will just overpower these people. We're going to beat them up and take their food. That's what they thought. For they thought of getting their provision for pay from the Philistine, and if not, they would take it by force. That's what it says here. And these men were very mighty and valiant men. One man could pursue 1,000, and two could rout 10,000. Of course, they're African. So they trusted to their strength and went together as they were, and they directed these course towards the land of Gath. And they went down and found the shepherds of Gath feeding the cattle of the children of Gath. And they said to the shepherd, "Give us some of the sheep for pay, that we may eat, for we are hungry. For we have eaten no bread this day." And the shepherd said, "Are they our sheep or cattle, that we should give them to you even for pay?" So the children of Ephraim approached to take them by force. And the shepherds of Gath shouted over them that their cry was heard at a distance. So all the children of Gath went out to them. And when the children of Gad saw the evil doings of the children of Ephraim, they returned and assembled the men of Gad, and they put on each man his armor, and they came to fight. Now, this is really bravado by the children of Ephraim. They felt, we are now coming from Egypt. We are strong enough. We have gold. We have money. We can buy our way through liberation. And the word says, come with me to verse 15. And these men were engaged in battle with the children of Ephraim. And Yah delivered, listen to me, and Yah delivered the children of Ephraim into the hands of the Philistines. And they smote all the children of Ephraim, all who had gone forth to Egypt, none remaining but 10 men, 30,000, and only 10 lived to tell the tale, who ran away from the engagement. For this evil, hear me, for this evil was from Yah against the children of Ephraim, for they transgressed the word of Yah in going forth from Egypt before the period had arrived, which Yah in the days of old had appointed Israel. You know, sometimes Yah put the people in a place and say, stay there. Learn. Don't move. I'm sending you there. And people get up sometime and they leave in a huff. They leave by their own volition. And then they cut their own greatness short by way of disobedience. It happened here. Sometimes people leave a particular gathering of people, a particular assembly, before they will leave, and they suffer the outcome, which is disastrous, as it was in the case of these people. Now, and it says here, verse 18, and of the Philistine also there fell great many, about 20,000 men, and their brethren carried them and buried them in the cities. I want you to follow me closely now. Two groups of people fighting. The children of Ephraim fighting against the Philistine. The children of Ephraim left Egypt against the command of Yah. Remember, during this time, Moses is king of the Cushites. We mustn't forget that he ruled the Cushites for 40 years. But it says here, the Philistines, they were buried. That's Goliath's people. Verse 19, and the slain of the children of Ephraim remained forsaken in the valley of Gath for many days and years, and were not brought to burial. And the valley was filled with men's bones. Are you getting it? And the men who had escaped from the battle came to Egypt and told all the children of Israel all had befallen them. And their father Ephraim mourned over them for many days, and his brethren came and consoled them. And he came unto his wife, and she bare a son, and called his name Berah, for she was unfortunate in his house. Did you get that? So the word wants us to know that these men went forth from the place of Egypt long before they were supposed to, against the will of Yah. And so you understand now in the book of Jeremiah, when the word says there is weeping by Rachel, because Rachel is the mother of Joseph, and Joseph is the father of these Manasseh and Ephraim. So technically, Rachel is here being depicted as the mother of the nation, and she's crying. Why is she crying? We will see in a minute. You better come with me to Ezekiel chapter 37. Ezekiel chapter 37. And the prophet wrote, the hand of Yahweh was upon me and carried me out of the spirit of Yahweh and set me down in the midst of the valley, was full of bones. These bones that he saw were the people who left Egypt before the time, the Alkebulan, the North African descendants. They were in the valley, not buried. So when we read Ezekiel chapter 37, we know that these are Joseph's descendants, Ephraim's descendants, that were slaughtered by the Philistines, and their bones lay in the valley. Now this is 1,000 years later. 1,000 years later, and Yah sent Ezekiel to go and prophesy to these North African bones. That's the subject we're dealing with this morning. The bones of the Alkebulans, Hebrews. Let's read again for emphasis. The hand of Yahweh was upon me and carried me out in the spirit of Yahweh and set me down in the midst of the valley, which was full of bones. The Philistines slaughtered them and caused me to pass by them round about, and behold, there were very many in the open valley, of course, 30,000 minus 10 to be exact. And he said to me, son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, O Yahweh, thou knowest. Again he said to me, prophesy unto the bones, prophesy unto these African boys, and say unto them, O ye dry bone, hear the word of Yahweh. Thus saith Yahweh unto these bones, behold, I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. This has a prophetic ring to it, that the people of Africa in the end time, they're going to raise up. They are coming to life again. They are coming to understand who they are, that they can trace their lineage, their genetics, all the way through onto Ephraim when Jacob blessed them and gave them the birthright. So whoever may be claiming something else that's not there, the word of Yah is clear. The perspicuity of the word is such that we can tell ourselves all kinds of things, but it's in the word. Prophesy to them. Thus saith Yahweh unto these bones, behold, I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. And I will lay sinews upon you, and I will bring up flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live. See how many times he's telling you you're going to live? Despite the fact that colonialism has conquered your land, abuses had taken place, slavery had taken place. In the Americas, in Europe, and elsewhere in England, it has taken. He says, I'm going to breathe new breath into you. Prophesy to the wind. So we can remain sanguine about this thing. There is hope beyond the dark clouds of adversity. There is hope. So I prophesied, said the prophet, this is verse 7, as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise. That noise is now. People in America, people in Britain, people in the Caribbean, people all over the world, in Africa, they're coming to the understanding of who they are. They know their history, and they know that their identity has been stolen. They know that, and they're coming together because Yah is breathing new breath into them, and they're now understanding. So when I beheld, lo, the sinews and the flesh came upon them, and the skin covered them above, but there was no breath in them. Then said he unto me, prophesy unto the wind, prophesy, son of man, and say to the wind, thus saith Yahweh, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe upon these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came on into them, and they lived and stood up unto their feet, and exceeding great number. Did you hear that? Let's remind ourselves, we just read Bereshit chapter 48, and we saw that these boys, and let's look at it, these North African boys, were born to the daughter of the priest of On. Now, let's look at it. And let's, if we may, quote Dr. Leakey. And what he says in his research in Kenya and throughout Africa, and concludes that black skin is indeed dominant, and white skin is recessive. If something is recessive, it is lacking in pigmentation. We're not saying this to stir up mischief or anything like that. No, we're dealing with the biology of the theology of the anthropology. That's what we're dealing with of this subject this morning. And we said we would deal with all of these, including the archaeology and the geography. We said that, and that's what we're doing. So if we take that to be true, that you can get the recessive from the dominant, but you cannot get the dominant from the recessive, you must conclude this. Even if Joseph was a different coloration, and we know he looked like the Egyptian, we know that. But let's assume, for argument's sake, he looked differently. He's married to a black woman. Because of the dominancy of the skin that Yah gifted these people, the offspring are going to become like the dominant. We see that in our own day here. If you put a white person with a black woman, the child is going to take on the color of the dominant skin. And then if you put the other way around, it's the same thing that happened. These are just facts that we must accept as intelligent, sentient human beings. We've got to accept that because it's in the Word. So when I said the dry bones of the Alkebulan, I am saying whatever color Joseph may have been, these offspring here, because their mother was black, we know that for certain. It was in the 18th dynasty that they're black. They're bronze. And the black man is not an extreme type. There are various shades of him. We want to get that. And so when we talk about Israel, no analysis of Israel, it seemed to me, biblically, can be complete without the factor of these two boys and the coloration of Israel. It can't be, because the word is letting us know that these boys, in their own pride, because of their strength and their wealth in Egypt, 30 years before the Exodus, while Moses is preparing himself to lead them out, he is now king of the Cushites. They left and got slaughtered and remained in the valley. And 1,000 years subsequent, Yah called Ezekiel and said, prophesy. And of course, it's prophetic also. The Africans, you can hear in Zimbabwe and South Africa. You can hear it. And in Ghana, you can hear it. And Malawi, you hear it, don't you? The bones are coming together. And Europe hears the bones, and the neck bone is being connected to the toe bone, and the toe bone is being connected to the ankle bone, and the ankle bone is connecting, and they're afraid because the bones are coming together, because Yah is breathing his spirit into these Ephraimites, the children of Ephraim, who got the blessing, the birthright. So my question is, when they say that the land of Israel belonged to a particular group of people, what is it that gives content to that view? When the word here says clearly that Jacob blessed these descendants of Joseph and gave them the birthright, and the scepter was given to Judah, and the scepter shall not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. So we may well pick up the story in 1 Kings chapter 10, because we know that Shalom, or Solomon, knew his roots. And we're told, and again, they tried to minimize and marginalize these stories so we don't get the full picture of it. He fell in love with an Ethiopian woman, and he had a son called Menelik. And so this Hebrew faith was all the way over in Africa, and it became the foremost faith in places like Ethiopia. And so we know this. And so people are coming to this thing, and what you say to me, but what about the people now who are claiming that they are the original Jews, the ones now over in Israel? Now, we must stay with the Bible, as always, the word of Yah, and not veer off and conjecture this thing. We know most of those people came from Europe. We know that. And if we turn to Genesis chapter 10, that's Bereshit, And we read, well, let's read 3 verses. Because the word said, this is Moses writing. And just to remind you, Moses is the same man, Moshe, who took dictation from Yahweh on Mount Sinai. He was also the king who ruled the Cushites for 40 years. Let's not forget that. He's writing here. Now, these are the generation of the sons of Noah, Shem and Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. And he starts to list the Japhetic people in verse 2. The sons of Japheth are Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras. Verse 3. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and Rippah, and Togar. Now, we don't have to conjecture. Moses says the Ashkenazi are descendants of Gomer, who is descended from Japheth. Verse 5, by these were the hides of the Gentiles. What? Wait a minute. Let's read that slowly. Moses is here writing, and Moses wants to instruct us correctly. He writes that the Ashkenaz descended from Gomer, who descended from Japheth. Then he qualifies the whole thing. He says, these are the Gentiles. So if we do deductive and inductive study here, by way of deduction, we see that if Noah has 3 sons, and one of them is responsible for the peopling of the Gentiles, then by deduction, the other 2 are not. It's there, and I would urge you to read it for yourself. So you say to me, but what about these people over there? And don't forget, there are a lot of Ethiopian falasha, derogatory term for these Ethiopian Jews over there, lots of Jews. And as I indicated earlier, that an Israelite is not merely somebody who is born in Israel. No. So we need to scrap that idea. So you say to me, well, there are many people over there say that they're Jews, and that's true. And so we have to clinically analyze the whole thing. You know, we've got to do that, because Rachel is still crying for those Alkebulans that are lying in the valley that were not buried. In fact, it says that the Philistines got a better burial than they did. They were lying there, right? So we've got to understand that. And so that Japheth is now sitting in the tent of Shem. Isn't that what the word says? He's sitting in the tent of Shem. Now, if you leave your house, and no one lives there, because you can understand, Israel, the children of Israel, were taken out of Israel in 722 BC. That means the Israelites are gone. The children of Ephraim and Manasseh are gone. They're gone, and they're scattered all over the nation. So the land is no longer called Israel. It's called the land of Judah, because when Judah went to Babylon, Judah, through Zerubbabel, Nehemiah and Ezra, they came back, but Israel did not come back. So if you leave your house unattended, and I decide to squat there for a while, and you didn't come back for a few years, those who didn't know the history would think that I am the owner of your house. Isn't that right? So the word says that Japheth would what? Dwell in the tent of Shem. And people would later think that they are Shemetic. All that I'm saying here is the word of Yahweh. I will not add or take away. And I urge you to read this thing for yourself. I did say earlier, this would be a digging expedition for us to look at the word, because it has enormous implications for us. And that's why we also must turn to the book of Zephaniah as we bring this thing to a close. Zephaniah, as you know, is an end-time prophet, and Zephaniah is telling you the word of Yahweh which came unto Stephanus. Let's call him Stephanus, it's right name. Let's not anglicize it. And the word of Yahweh which came to Stephanus, the son of Cushi. The son of who? Cushi. Did you get that? Remember that Nimrod is related to Cush. And at the time of Abraham lived, Nimrod was the king. Abraham's father, Terah, was a priest in Nimrod's court. So the prophet Stephanus is letting you know that his father is Cushi, is a bronze black man, is African, is Alkebulan. That's what he is. The son of Gedaliah. Now, Gedaliah, you remember, was the governor of Judah. Hear me? So if Gedaliah is related to Cushi and Zephaniah, and these are all bronze people, and he is the governor of Judah, then what are we to conclude? What are we to conclude about the original people here, both Israel and Judah? Who are they? All right, if you're not convinced, come with me to chapter 3. Chapter 3 of Stephanus. And we will read verse 9 and 10. For then will I turn to the people a pure language, I assume that to be Hebrew, that they may all call upon the name of Yahweh. What will they call him? Yahweh, not God, not Jesus, not Lord. He's not a British baron. They will call him Yahweh to serve him with what? One accord. So when we have the churches today, and one church is saying, I am Baptist, Pentecostal, Seventh-day Adventist, Episcopalian, Catholic, and so on and so forth, and they're worshiping him on different days, saying it is all right to give him his glory, and the first day is the seventh day. He says, no. He said, they worship me in one accord. Verse 10, for beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. What? For beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliant, even the daughter of my dispersed. Well, we all went to the same school. What does dispersed mean? Scattered. So when we talk about the scattered children of Israel, who are we talking about? The word says, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, Cush. That's what the word says. Shall bring mine offering. What offering? If you understand that, then you'll understand this. When the eunuch, the Ethiopian eunuch, in chapter 8 of the book of Acts, went to Jerusalem to worship, his intent was to ascertain when the Messiah is coming back so he can bring back the offering. What is the offering? The offering is the Ark of the Covenant, which is in Axum. It was first taken to Elephantine Island in Egypt and then to Tanakekos. That's how it was. And therefore, we are tracing the anthropology, the archaeology, the geography, the genetics of these people we call Israelite, and we see they bear no resemblance to some of the people today who say they are. And moreover, the point I really want to emphasize that you don't miss is that to be an end-time Israelite is not to be born in Israel, it's to be born in Yeshua. And Nicodemus understood that after a while, because he came to Yeshua by night and asked the question, well, how can a man enter into his mother's womb a second time? He said, you have to be born again in Yeshua. And if you're born in Yeshua, only then may you call Abraham your father. So come with me to 2 Chronicles. And we'll close on this, and we will look at chapter 35. Moreover, Josiah, king of, kept a Passover unto Yahweh in Jerusalem, and they killed the Passover on the 14th day of the first month. And he set the priests in their charges and encouraged them to service of the house of Yahweh, and said unto the Levites that bought all Israel, which were holy unto Yahweh, put the ark in the house which Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, did build. It shall not be a burden unto your shoulders. Serve now Yahweh your Elohim and his people, Israel. Now, we have good King Josiah here, son of Hammon, and through Manasseh, through Hezekiah, which is the same lineage of Zephaniah or Stephanus, who is a Cushite. The same lineage. That means Stephanus the prophet and Josiah are relatives. They're family. And he's telling them, the Levite, go and get the ark of the covenant and bring it into the temple. Obviously, it wasn't there. Where was the ark? The priest had moved the ark and taken it to Elephantine Island, where? In North Africa. And they built a temple there, and they worshipped in Egypt, even as they did in Jerusalem, everything there. And so the ark was subsequently moved to Tanakekos Island in Ethiopia, and then it was moved to Axum. So when the Ethiopian eunuch came, he came to find out when the Messiah is coming back. Philip told him when the Messiah is coming back. And so when Messiah comes back, they will bring the Ark of the Covenant and give it to him as a gift. And so you're wondering, what is happening in Gaza? Remember, the Ethiopian eunuch was in Gaza. It was a land given to them by Solomon, King Solomon, by virtue of his relationship with the Queen of Sheba. So now that Messiah is due to come back soon, we can see the sign, and he has to bring his people back, because in Isaiah 11:11, he says, I'm going to round them back up. Then he has to prepare the land. And squatters' rights don't say anything now, because the land must not be sold. It must not be sold. And that's what we see. So Isaiah want to remind you, as he has reminded me, chapter 11 in verse 11, he says, what are you going to do? He says, I'm going to, and it shall come to pass in that day that Yahweh shall set his hand again a second time. He did it the first time, to recover the remnant of his people. Not all of them, the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush. Cush. Of course, he's not going to leave out Moses' people. And from Elam, that's Iran, and from Shinar, that's Babylon, and from Ammon, and from the islands of the sea. One could assume that's the Caribbean, and also the land over there we call what? Where we talked about a few weeks ago?
Philippines.
The Philippines, the islands of the sea. And why it's important for you to grasp all of these, let me really just close on this, because there's so much to cover that, I just want to give you, to whet your appetite of your own history. Jeremiah, come with me to Jeremiah chapter 16. Jeremiah chapter 16. And the word here said in verse 14, therefore, behold, the days come. If something is coming, it hasn't come yet. Saith Yahweh, it shall be no more be said, Yahweh liveth, that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. He said that was a dry run. But Yahweh liveth, that brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, and from the lands within he had driven them, and will bring them again in their land that I gave unto their fathers. Behold, I will send for many fishes, and Yahweh, and they shall fish them, and after will I send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and from every hill and of the holes of the rock. The interesting thing here is that I noticed the areas. We talked about the geography earlier, from Iran and from Cush and Ethiopia and from Sudan, but I see no reference to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I just thought I'd throw that out for you to think on. And so, it says in verse 19, O Yahweh, my strength and my fortress, and my refuge in the day of affliction, the Gentiles shall come unto thee from the ends of the earth, and shall say, surely our fathers have inherited lies and vanity, and things wherein there is no profit. They have inherited lies. The churches have been complicit in the lies. They've manufactured them and have sent them out. But this morning, we want you to know that the Alkebulan Hebrews, they are none other than the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh. These two boys were born in North Africa to a black mother and the grandfather, they are the children of Israel. They were given the blessing. And Yah said, I'm going to round them back up. And no government can stop this happening. So Yah, perhaps, I believe, is clearing out the land to bring his people back. Whereas perhaps you had believed that this all happened in 1948. No. No, he said the Gentile will beat down, trod down the land of Israel. And so we're looking at identity crisis here. Because those who are Israel do not know. And those who are not believe they are. But I want to leave you with this thought. Whatever people might say, to be an Israelite is to be in Yeshua and to accept him and to live by him and his word. In Yeshua's name I pray. Hallelujah.